everybody to our meeting tonight about the work that is going on over in the fireworks area that encompasses part of Hanover and Hanson. Actually, before we get going, we've been asked by Carol back there with the camera to, if it's at all possible, to move forward so that you'll be on cable television.
That's a real incentive.
It's not an incentive. They asked me to have people move forward, and I said, nah, I don't think that's going to happen, but if you would like to move forward, please do. If you could please rise just for a moment so we could say the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Just to introduce myself, I'm Sean Keeley. I'm the Hanson Town Moderator, although I'm not here in any official capacity. The selectmen asked if I could come down and keep this unruly crowd, from going crazy. Well, welcome everybody. Actually, we have a good turnout tonight, and so what I would like to do is just start off by having the people up front here introduce themselves, and then I believe there's a fairly short presentation to be made. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Laura Fitzgerald Kemet. I'm the chair of the Hanson Board of Selectmen, and the board thought that it was important to ask these folks from Mass DEP to be here tonight to answer questions that might be unique to the Hanson citizens, and so that we could get our questions answered and have maybe our voices heard in a respectful way. And we've also got Wes Bloss, who's in the audience, and
good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Dyer. I'm one of the selectmen here in Hanson as well.
Good evening. Wow, you can hear me from way back here.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Debbie Marshall-Hewlett. I work for Mass DEP. I have been with Mass DEP for about 26 years. I'm the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup Audit Section Chief. I'm also the product manager for the former National Fireworks site, as you know, that's in Hanover and part of Hanson. And happy to be here tonight to answer any questions that Hanson residents may have on site cleanup.
My name is Gerard Martin. I'm the Deputy Regional Director for the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup in the Southeast region. I work with Debbie. And again, here to explain a little bit about what's going on and primarily listen to your questions. Okay.
So we'll have a bit of a presentation, and then we'll be happy to take any questions that you might have, engage in some discussion. But when that happens, I'd ask you to come down to the microphone and just state your name and where you live so everybody knows who's asking the question. All right, well, thank you very much.
All set?
Yes.
All right, I'll start off. Before we start talking about the fireworks site specifically, I want to talk a little bit about how our program works and how this site is a little different from how our normal program works. So our program is considered a semi-privatized program where we actually, back in 1993, we started this profession in Massachusetts called the licensed site professional. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. That oversees the cleanup of hazardous waste sites. Prior to that, everything that was done on every hazardous waste site required our review and approval. And we didn't really have the resources necessary to keep those hazardous waste sites moving forward and getting cleaned up. And we have quite a few statewide. For example, in the Southeast region, we have 80 towns and about 25 staff to oversee the cleanup of hazardous waste sites in the region. Did we lose this? Nope, still good?
Good.
So it's a semi-privatized program where in most cases a licensed site professional does the work and we audit the work after the fact, kind of like the IRS, but for environmental issues. So Deb mentioned that she's the chief of the auditing section. Her section focuses on auditing stuff that was submitted to us that wasn't necessarily done with our review and approval, so we're looking at after the fact. The fireworks site is a little different for a couple of reasons. One, it's a pretty complex site. And we can choose, in some cases, to have direct oversight of the cleanup that goes on in particular sites. And we have chosen to have direct oversight on the fireworks site, given its complexity. In addition to that, an escrow account was established when one of the potentially responsible parties went bankrupt. And that escrow account was set up, and it requires us to review and approve all the disbursements from that escrow account. So it only makes sense that we also directly oversee all the work that's being done so we can adequately review the disbursements of the money. So every step of the way on this site, we're involved in the work that needs to be done. Now, back in on September 24th, we had a public meeting in Hanover, and at that meeting, we actually had representatives from the licensed site professional company, the environmental firm that's actually doing the work out in the field, and we also had some folks from the Department of Public Health. And unfortunately, we couldn't get either here tonight, but I believe that was filmed. And any questions that were raised as at that meeting will be put together with responses and ultimately uploaded onto the website. Now, I know that the town of Hanson has some information on the fireworks site on their website, but I got to let you know the town of Hanover, who's been on the front lines for a while, has a very significant amount of information on their website. Very easily laid out, so you can find information and go look. You can look at the presentation that was given on September 24th. You can look at past reports. You can look at past presentations that were given. A lot of good information is on the Hanover site, and I believe Hanson has a link right to the Hanover site to help you out to see that information. So tonight, the focus of the meeting that we had on the 24th, and likewise tonight, is Tetra Tech, the environmental company hired by the potentially responsible parties, submitted a Phase 3 report to us, which looks at the alternatives for cleaning up the site. And we're giving the public in the affected communities the opportunity to comment on that report. Okay, so Debbie's going to explain a little bit about the MCP process, MCP, sorry. I try not to speak in acronyms when I'm in these settings, but it's hard to get away from them all the time. It's the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. That's a set of regulations that we use to oversee the cleanup of hazardous waste sites. So she'll explain the process a little bit. I think we're going to try to get the one critical slide that the licensed site professional brought, which looks at the various alternatives cleaning the site. That includes costs and the different factors that they evaluated, and going through that process. And right now, we're in the middle of the comment period, the public comment period. We have not made a decision on the Phase 3 report yet. We will not do that until we get all the comments from the public as well, because we want to consider what your concerns are when we're looking at this report and figuring out how to move forward. The comment period closes on October 25th, correct?
Yes.
And Deb will also explain how you get comments to the licensed site professional. And what they will do is take their comments, they may revise their Phase 3 report. They will officially submit the Phase 3 report. It's not been officially submitted to us yet, just a draft has, with a list of all the comments they received and how they address those comments. And when we review it, we'll be looking at the responses to the comments to make sure that they're adequate and comply with our regulations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Deb.
Thanks, Rod. So I think what we'll do first is you can see the website, your nice Town of Hanson website. Abby, if you could click on that top link where it says Meet with Mass DEP. So I had sent over a couple of links. So as Gerard mentioned, the town of Hanover has a lot of information, not only on the September 24th meeting that we had recently, but prior meetings, prior notices, a lot of info. So Abby, I'm going to have you click on another link here. And this will help you, when you pull this up at home, if you would like to, you can click on these links to get to some of the information as well. No, go back to the one you were on. And one? Okay, so what this is basically an executive summary of the Phase 3. Gerard mentioned the Phase 3. It's a remedial action plan. It's the alternatives of what the consultant and their client, the responsible party, has proposed to do to move forward to clean up the site. That's what the comment period is that we're in right now. So this link in this document is a three or four page summary of a report that's a whole lot of pages. So this is a good thing to take a look at. And can you go back? So can you click on the September 24th link? Okay, so this is the website that Gerard referred to that I was talking about, where there's a whole lot of information on the Hanover Town website, including the presentations that Mass DEP did, that the Department of Public Health was at that meeting. They did a presentation they're actually doing. They put together a scope of work, and they're doing a study on cancer incidents. As you may have heard in the news that we had someone come forward who has brain cancer, unfortunately, and he's put together some information. So the Department of Public Health is looking into this, and they're conducting their study. So they were at the Hanover meeting also to present generalized information about cancer studies and what they are doing. They have not finished their study. When they do, then they will come forward again, and they'll let us know. They'll also let the towns know.
Can I interject?
Let's
Can I
see.
interject for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So just to maybe explain a little bit the roles between DEP and DPH, Department of Public Health.
Thank you.
So basically, when we're working on a hazardous waste site, we look at the conditions as they are now and try to take those and get them cleaned up to meet certain cleanup criteria that's outlined in the Massachusetts contingency plan. So we're kind of the agency that takes the situation, moves forward with it to get it to a level of no significant risk. The Department of Public Health in a lot of these cases, and we work with them on a lot of our sites, will kind of help you guys if you have questions on, geez, I used to play at the site when I was a little kid. What might that mean? That's not something that neither Deb nor I are trained in, but the Department of Public Health can help you with those types of questions. And I believe they have contact information on their presentation.
They do.
So if you do have questions about things like that, feel free to contact them, and they'll put you in touch with the people who are working on this project.
Okay, so Abby, what I'm going to have you do is click on, if you can move this whole page up. I'm sorry, if you go down to the bottom where it says public meeting for September 24th. Okay, the presentation by the Mass DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. It is,
Oh, that's me. That's at the end.
that's your last slide.
Oh, that was
I'm
fast.
sorry, could you go?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, if you could go back. It's very hard at this angle I'm at here.
Third bullet down.
1, 2, yes, thank you. Third bullet down. Right there. Great. Okay, so this was my presentation that I'm going to do for you tonight. This is the exact presentation we gave to the residents in the town of Hanover, and this is basically explaining some of the regulatory process. I apologize if this is a little boring, but just want to explain to you some of the process that we go through, that hazardous waste sites go through. A total, not including this slide, but a total of 11 slides. Talks a little bit about background. There's a site layout slide, a slide on the potentially responsible parties, a little bit about our regulatory phased process that all sites go through, the location of the munitions that are at the site. We have a slide for that. And then the contacts for Mass DEP and the Attorney General's office. So, great, yeah, that's what, exactly. If you could, I'll explain this slide and then just ask the next slide. Okay. Great, so that's the background. So a little bit of background about the site. 240 acres. It's a pretty big piece of property, generally between King and Winter Streets. I know that many of you are familiar with the area. Historical activities at the site. There was a lot of research and development, manufacture, munitions, pyrotechnics, which is basically fireworks. United States government operated out there, the Department of Defense, and commercial manufacturer of civilian fireworks as well. And this time frame that all of this occurred was between 1907 and 1970. Lead, mercury, organic solvents, propellants, explosives, those are really the main contaminants that we are concerned about out there. And they are there because of manufacturing operations that occurred at the site. Next slide. Thank you. So several companies, one is the National Fireworks Company, operated the site, like I said, until 1970. There is currently an industrial park there that operates at the northern and eastern portions of the site, and there are privately owned companies that currently operate there. The town of Hanover did purchase approximately 130 acres of the site, and that occurred in the 1970s. There's a lot of information, a lot of environmental chronology, you can imagine, between 1907, 1970s until currently, on things that have happened at the site. So I could talk all night just about that. So what we've done is we have an environmental chronology poster board. You probably saw it when you came in. We have two of them. I know that you probably can't read them from where you're sitting, except maybe right here in the front, but that gives a good rendition, bullet by bullet, of what has occurred in the recent last few decades. And there really has been a lot that's been done out at the site to get to the point that we're at today. So please take a look at that at some point. Feel free to get up, take a look at it, or when we're done, you can take a look at it as well. And that's the poster board. Next slide, please. Okay, so basically the site layout. Like I said, it's between King and Winter Streets. You can see up in the northern portion of the site, the red box. The manufacturing area, that's mainly exactly what happened at the site historically. Manufacturing, a lot of the storage took place in the middle. You see the blue arrows that are there. So the manufacturing wasn't just in that red box at the top. Some of it went across, some of it happened in the middle, the center portion of the site. But a lot of the testing and disposal did occur in the southern portion of the site. Again, a little bit in the center and the northern, but we're finding, and when we show the map for the munitions removal, a lot of that is in the southern portion of the site. So that's basically the scope of the site, and it's quite large. Next slide. Who's responsible? So we have a number of what we call potentially responsible parties, PRPs, within our regulations. That's what they're called. In the fireworks site joint defense group, that's one, and they're comprised of a number of parties. National Coding, just like is listed on the slide, MIT, Susquehanna Corporation, bankrupt, Kerr-McGee Chemical Corporation, bankrupt. And Gerard had mentioned that this is unique. One of the reasons it's unique, this site, than other ones that we've dealt with in the Southeast region, is that this was a very large settlement that occurred during bankruptcy, and this expendable trust that you see under Kerr-McGee, under that second bullet, $68 million was established in a trust fund specifically for the cleanup of this site. It's Mass DEP who determines the reimbursements for that. So in Hanover, when we had the September 24th meeting, Tetra Tech, the licensed site professional, they did the presentation on what they're actually doing out at the property currently. They are hired by the Fireworks Site Joint Defense Group, this PRP. They do the work. They submit invoices to us at Mass DEP. We scrutinize those. We review those meticulously. And then when we agree that that is money that should have been spent at the site, and a good use of those funds, then we approve that, the money goes back, and then they get paid. So it's quite a process that we do. Another responsible party, United States Department of Defense, that's Army, Air Force, and Navy. They did military testing out at the site historically, and it was those branches of the service, so we have Department of Defense. All property owners where site contaminants have come to be located, that is a definition in the statute, in the law, that anyone who owns a piece of property could be a potentially responsible party. The town of Hanover, since they purchased the property, they are a responsible party as well. And that's what I have for responsible parties. Next slide, please. So now I have 5 slides on the regulatory phase process. Basically, Mass DEP, we are tasked with ensuring the cleanup of sites. This is what we do. A licensed site professional, Gerard, explained a little bit how back in 1993 our program changed so that we have individuals who are licensed by a separate licensing board who actually do the work, and we can audit that work at any point. And that's what my section back in the Lakeville office, the Southeast region, this is what we do for sites in the Southeast region. We typically can provide regulatory oversight. We do this through audits, but in this site, we are providing direct oversight. So this one, like Gerard mentioned, is a little different. The site is very complex for a number of reasons: the contaminants, the mercury in the sediment, the settlement that occurred, and the amount of contamination that is in the sediment. That's one of the things, the munitions as well. It sounds like we have a sporting event coming out there. Thank you. So we're providing direct oversight on this particular site, and we have done this for a number of years. Next slide. So the Massachusetts contingency plan, there are a number of phases that all sites, not just the fireworks site, all sites go through. Phase 1, it's after a release has occurred, an initial site investigation happens to determine what contaminants of concern, what contaminants basically are out there. The phase 2 is a more comprehensive site assessment where the extent of contamination is defined both laterally and vertically. So in the ground, which type of media, is it in air, is it in sediment, surface water? That's
Yep. Sure. So before she goes on, so I think it's important for you guys to know that they've completed the phase 2. So that's the full extent of contamination, and we've approved that. So we feel comfortable that the work they've done has, except in one case that Deb will talk about, and we've got a plan for dealing with that, and actually involves Hanson, the contamination in Hanson. So with respect to the site, we feel pretty comfortable that we know that where the contamination is. I know when we were at the Hanover meeting, a lot of people, with private irrigation wells that live near the site were concerned that maybe their irrigation wells were impacted. We explained that we had a good idea of how widespread the contamination was, and it wasn't in that area. But we also sampled their wells just to demonstrate to them that their wells were not impacted, and they weren't. So we feel very comfortable that we have the extent of contamination at the site.
Yes. Thank you, Gerard.
Okay.
And so the next phase, which Gerard alluded to, the phase 3 remedial action plan. The reason that's in blue is that's the phase that this site is in right now. This is the phase, and this is the report that we're looking for comments. We're in the middle of a public comment period, which ends October 25th, which is next Friday. So this is what we're looking for, any comments that you might have. You probably don't want to look at the whole 1,000-page report. If you do, that's great, but there's an executive summary too that you can look at. There is the link I showed you earlier. So that's basically the evaluation and the selection of the cleanup alternatives. And that draft plan was submitted to Mass DEP on July 17th. So we are in the process of reviewing that plan as well. And so once we get through phase 3, the site will move into phase 4 and then 5, basically implementing the plan that is selected during phase 3, and then any type of operation and maintenance that we need to do as a result of the phase 3 remedial action plan that's chosen. So that's the phased process. Next slide, please. Okay, so Gerard already talked a little bit about this with the Phase 2 findings, but basically what has been found is mercury detected in sediment, soil, groundwater, fish tissue, lead, other metals detected in soil and groundwater, sediment across the site, volatile organic compounds or VOCs. Those were also found in soil and groundwater as a result of historical operations at the site. Gerard just mentioned that we had done irrigation well sampling. Did you mention indoor air? No. So trichloroethylene is a solvent that we have looked at different sites across the Commonwealth, not just this particular site, but we're looking for that in indoor air if it looks like historical contamination was over a certain threshold in groundwater. We were concerned about this site as well with the TCE, the trichloroethylene, so we sampled the indoor air of a couple of sites, a couple of buildings in the industrial park area, and none of the contaminants were over any of the thresholds that we consider dangerous or a threat to human health. So that testing, all the results were favorable in that case. The additional testing that Gerard mentioned that we are still going to do, hopefully we're going to get to this by the spring, is we're going to hire a contractor to do some sediment sampling, and this may include some of the property that some of the Hanson residents may own. It's between the Factory Pond Dam and the Ludham's Ford Dam. And we want to ensure that all of the locations we're aware of that may have mercury contamination, we want to make sure we know about that, and that is worked into the Phase 3 remedial action plan so that contaminated sediment can be removed. So that is work that we are still going to do that will add to the Phase 2 comprehensive site assessment. Other than that piece of work, the Phase 2 has been completed.
So if I may interject again, and I apologize. So basically what had happened when they completed their Phase 2 report, they acknowledged that the sediment in Factory Pond and the streams leading into Factory Pond were impacted with mercury. And their conclusions in the Phase 2 report was that the mercury from the former fireworks site impacted the sediments down to the Factory Pond Dam. They did collect some samples between Factory Pond Dam and Ludham's Ford Dam, and some of those samples had levels of mercury in the sediment above the cleanup standard, but they attributed that mercury to other businesses that may have been along that stretch of the river in the past. We didn't completely buy into their conclusion, but in the interest of keeping the site moving forward, we said, all right, go start working on your Phase 3 report, and we'll get a contractor out there to do a little bit more work to fill in some of the gaps to help us decide whether or not you need to add this to your Phase 3. So it's kind of the reason we're doing it is so that this project can keep going forward. Instead of getting into the back and forth argument of who's right, who's wrong, you know, we'll accept their Phase 2 for now, but we're collecting more information to determine if they need to do something with that sediment.
Right. Thank you. And I think we can move on to the next slide. So just this one more on the regulatory phase process. There's a risk characterization is always done when closure reports are submitted to us, and that basically identifies, evaluates conditions at the site, and that characterizes the risk of harm to human health, safety, welfare, and the environment. That will also be done when this site, well, they did do a risk characterization in the Phase 2 and found that there was risk at the site, and so now the site has transitioned into Phase 3. But the Phase 2 risk characterization findings, no public or private water supply wells have been impacted by the contaminants released at the site. That's a really important piece that I think a few residents in Hanover didn't quite understand. But we have tested groundwater. A lot of the wells, a lot of the folks in the area receive drinking water from municipal water supply wells. Those municipal water supply wells are tested separately than what we're doing for the fireworks and what's being done at the fireworks site. So those are separately tested, and the results have been fine. They haven't had problems in those municipal water supply wells.
In addition, when it comes to municipal water supply wells, the water supplier, in this case the town of Hanover and the town of Hanson, are required to determine what we call the Zone 2, which is the zone of groundwater that's contributing to that well. And none of the Zone 2s for Hanover or Hanson wells are anywhere near the site. So none of the groundwater around the site is flowing towards public wells.
Right. And so what the Phase 2 findings from the risk characterizations also resulted in was a potential risk. You see the bullet below the Phase 2 risk characterization findings, potential risk from direct contact with metal impacted soil. So currently, the factory pond is off limits. Site access is restricted and patrolled by the Hanover Police Department, and they have made a number of arrests and stopped a number of individuals entering or attempting to enter the site. Impacted soil will be excavated and disposed of off-site. There are risks to people if you eat the fish. Do not eat the fish. There's been a fish advisory out for a long time, so don't eat the fish. As you can see up on the slide, risk to people, fish-eating birds, wildlife from ingestion of contaminants found in the fish, and a big contaminant for that is mercury. So the fish advisory has been put in place for a while. Remedial action, yes, is necessary to remove impacted sediment, and that is what this Phase 3 gets at. Dredging sediment, looking at removing the contaminants. And unexploded munitions, there is currently a removal action that's going on. It's called an immediate response action, and IRA is the acronym, and that is ongoing at the site. There are a lot of munitions, a lot more than we anticipated, that are being removed. We initially thought this would be something to take 6 months or so. It's been longer than 6 months.
So actually, in the LSP gave a presentation on the unexploded ordnance, which is on the Hanover website. And I don't think it's appropriate for us to go through his presentation, but just to give you the thumbnail. They were actually, the LSP and the Potentially Responsible Party Group was out. Their plan was to remove soils with metal contamination, lead and things like that, at the factory pond property. And they knew that when they did that, they were going to be encountering some unexploded ordnance because it was a test range for ordnance. And in July of 2017, we started getting reports from them about how much unexploded ordnance they were removing, and we said, this is no longer a soil removal project. This is now an unexploded ordnance removal project. And they've been focused on that, and rightfully so. Because of the potential safety hazards with that. And they've done a lot of work on both sides of Factory Pond in the area. They've got a lot of areas where the unexploded ordnance has been removed. I believe the number the LSP, the Life Site Professional, gave out at the public meeting was around 17,000 pieces of energetic unexploded ordnance has been removed from the site. There's still other areas that they need to look at and remove that, the unexploded ordnance at those locations. And then while they were doing this work, somebody was magnet fishing in Factory Pond. I don't know if you know what magnet fishing is. It's dragging a high-powered magnet along the bottom of a surface water body to see what you can find. And they actually found a bazooka shell. Okay, not a good thing. Luckily, it was an inert shell. But it indicated to us that there could be problems in the pond itself. And as we looked into it a little further, we found that there was a firing location on the west side of the pond, so they were testing some of this ordnance by shooting it across the pond. And apparently there's a bunch of metal in the pond. Some of it may be unexploded ordnance. We're not sure yet. They did do a geophysical survey on the surface of the pond. They actually pulled a magnetometer with a boat to determine where metallic materials were in the pond. And actually, it's all between that firing location and the berm, which when we get to a map, we could probably point out, but it's all in the town of Hanover. As they went away from that location towards the south, towards Hanson, we weren't seeing the metallic material in the pond bottom. We have talked to both towns about closing off the pond until this work is done, and that has been done. So they will be doing a removal of, well, they'll be investigating the metallic material that's on the bottom of the pond. Again, we don't know if it's on a closure ordinance. That will be part of their evaluation, and then removing it if it is. And it's a little trickier because they're also looking at dredging sediment, so we're trying to figure out which comes first, and does it happen at the same time? So that's part of the phase 3 as well.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and as far as the detonations, when we first pulled up the website on the screen, the first thing that shows up underneath the former Drod held this picture up, it's basically what the site looked like before a number of trees had to be cut down to remove the munitions. But right below that, it says controlled detonation notices. And the town of Hanover has a number of ways that they let residents who live, well, I think they're letting all the residents know, but certainly the ones that live near the site, they can feel the detonations. So a number of those have happened. We could not nearly have anticipated this many munitions to be found out at the site. So we're working in conjunction with the State Police Bomb Squad, with Tetra Tech, doing truly the best we can at removing the munitions as quickly as possible. I know this is not quick. It's going on 2 years, but considering what's out there, we feel strongly that we would rather be safe than sorry and get this removed from the site, so when it's opened back up and residents from Hanover and Hanson can go back into this conservation area, that you're not going to have to worry about munitions out there. So that's an active remedial action that's going on right now. And as far as current risk at the site, risk to yourself, to family members, if you're not exposed to these munitions, to this contamination, there is no risk. Like I said, the site access is restricted right now. The pond is off limits. You can't go out there. No exposure, no risk currently. We can't speak to what may have happened in the past, but we can say right now that as long as folks aren't out there, there is no risk out at the site. Next slide. And this is the last one for the regulatory phase process. Our regulations mandate the implementation of IRAs, immediate response actions, and that's what's going on, what Gerard and I have just been explaining about removing the munitions at the site. So that's what's going on currently. And the MCP also provides for public involvement opportunities, different points throughout site cleanup. That's what we did in Hanover with the town meeting, and that's what we're here doing tonight as well, to help all of you understand a little bit better what's going on out at the site. Next slide. And this slide. Okay, so that shows basically the munitions area. So this is the immediate response action. It's quite a large area.
Outlined in the red, right?
Yes, outlined in the red. And mainly over to the right-hand side of that red area, on that side of the pond. That's where a lot of the munitions are being removed. But we do have some on the left. We found basically a huge steel plate out there where there was a firing area, and the military was doing testing, trying to test different munitions, shooting them across the pond. Well, as you can imagine, not every shot works out perfectly, so some of these things landed in the pond. We're speculating. We already know about the one from the magnetic fisherman who found one, so we know at least that one was out there, and anticipated unlikely to find more.
And actually, one thing that was mentioned at the Hanover public meeting that's probably not a bad thing to mention here, is that a lot of people have been hiking around this site for years and may have found some souvenirs that you brought home that look kind of interesting. I know when I was younger, I found 5 or 6 20mm rounds in Wampatuck State Park, brought them to school, and the next day the police came to take them away. Things were different then, I wasn't on the news. But a lot of folks may have something in their garage or their basement that they've collected in the past and thought it was kind of neat. That is a piece of ordnance from the Hanover site. If you do, or if you know anyone that does, they can call the state police. Do not bring it anywhere. they will come and take it away for you and properly dispose of it.
Right, call them and they will come to you. You don't need to, don't bring the munitions to them or to us.
Yeah, no, we don't.
We don't, we don't want them.
That right there, are those streets on either side, can you tell us the names of those streets so we'll know really what we're looking at?
Yeah, and the map is kind of flattened out, but
Yeah.
it's basically Winter and King Street.
So this is King Street on this side right here. Okay, and a lot of folks might know where the industrial park is, right next to Forge Pond. That's the northern part of the former fireworks site. That's where they did a lot of the manufacturing of fireworks. And in fact, a lot of the buildings that are there are from the fireworks site, that they're just being reused for their new businesses. And then Winter Street, I don't think really shows up on here too well, but it's, yeah. It's really hard for us to see this from where we're sitting. But yeah, so the site itself is bracketed fairly well by Winter and King Street.
Yeah, sorry, there's a lot of information on that slide, but not the street names. I think we have them, we have to flatten it out
Yeah.
to get the
Yeah.
IRA area on there.
All right, it is on there now. Okay.
Yeah. So that's for the IRA. Next slide. And basically, the last slide has our contact information. So on the Mass DEP contact side, I'm listed up at the top as the project manager. Lenny Pinot works for Mass DEP, also in the Lakeville office. He was at the Hanover town meeting with us. He is the munitions task manager, and he was previously the manager for this site, actually since 2010. Then I became the project manager in 2017. So Lenny is still managing the munitions piece of it. Like we explained, it's quite a large piece of this cleanup.
He's overseeing the cleanup of Joint Base Cape Cod, which also has munition issues. And so he has a familiarity with that. So he's helping us out with that task on this one.
Right. And then Jennifer Davis, our attorney who works in the Boston office, the legal counsel on the site, Courtney Rainey, she does some of the government affairs, municipal partnership info. The Attorney General's office, Carol Yanko, the first person listed on the right-hand side. She is the person we work with at the Attorney General's office. And then a person that she works with, also Alicia. So those are the contacts.
And that might be a good segue to talk a little bit about what the Attorney General is doing for us and with us. So we have identified potentially responsible parties. We got some money from Tronox, and as you see when Deb puts up the next slide, and maybe we can start to find that, the estimated cost to clean up this site is much greater than the money we have in that escrow account. So we're in negotiations with the potentially responsible parties to ensure that there's a sufficient amount of funds to complete the cleanup out there. And feel we'll be very successful in those negotiations. We can't really talk too much more about them because they are ongoing enforcement negotiations. But that's, the Attorney General is our lead negotiator in those discussions.
Right, and we do anticipate, even though the negotiations are ongoing, that a negotiation and a settlement will occur and that we will get additional funding to clean up this site. So additional funds are forthcoming. The Attorney General's office is very confident that that will occur. If we can go back off of this slide presentation to that main fireworks page. Oh, perfect. And if you can pull up the 2 bullets below the one you just pulled up, it says presentation by Tetra Tech. If you could pull that one up. We're going to skip the Department of Public Health. We've explained to you what they did. They really are best to speak to the study that they're working on, and that study is ongoing. This presentation by Tetra Tech, this is a presentation where they got into the nuts and bolts of the phase 3, the remedial action plan that we're looking for your comments on. We did not do this piece of the presentation, but as Gerard mentioned, we can go to the slide that talks about, and I'm probably gonna have to stand over there to even see that, but
I think, can we just pause on that so people can get an idea of
Oh, for the IRA, for the munitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what Gerard was trying to recall, the amount of munitions that have actually been found at the site and removed. And it's pretty substantive. Let's see, does it have the pounds?
I don't know.
5,000.
I remember somebody saying 12 tons of something.
Yeah, there have been a number
Yeah.
of tons. I thought he had it on here.
This microphone that is still using.
They're actually removing energetic material as well as material that looks like it was related to
Yeah.
projectiles and things like that that weren't energetic.
Yep.
So the poundage might include both of those.
Oh, that,
But you get one.
Hello?
Yep.
I think it's good.
Okay, great. I can see much better from here. I'm sorry if I'm blocking any views from right here. One other thing that I did want to mention at the end of the contact slide. Wait, now I have to turn this way. We do have, as a result of the Hanover Town meeting, we had a number of questions at the meeting, afterwards by email, telephone. We had a lot of emails with a lot of questions. So what we're doing is we're putting together a FAQ, frequently asked questions. We did that after the last meeting that we had 2 years ago, but we're doing it for this one too, and we're drafting those questions and those answers that we hope to have out in the next couple of weeks. So that's a result of the September 24th meeting. We have also asked Tetra Tech to put together a Phase 3 fact sheet that I understand that they're done and is going through internal review through their own company. We hope to get that up on the Hanover Town website and then a link to the Hanson Town website, hopefully as soon as possible. And that is probably similar to the executive summary, but we'll have some additional information in it too, and I think easier to read. And then how to comment on the Phase 3. We're going to show you that information. There's a slide, 1 or 2 slides in this presentation that will show you how you can comment, and there's an email address, real simple, that you can send your comments to. For the Hanover Town meeting, we actually had a box. We passed out 5x7 cards. There were a lot of people there. Honestly, I think we got 5 cards maybe with a few things written on them. So we didn't get a whole lot of written comments, but we anticipate more are coming in by email. Okay, so now I'm going to turn back this way.
Can you lift that up, Deb?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you. Okay, so next slide. That one showed a lot of the munitions, response and progress. Yeah, Ron had a lot to say about all these sides, but let's go, next slide. Okay, this is a much better one for the munitions response progress area. And you can see over on the left-hand side, the Western Wetland Impact Area. That is an area where a huge steel plate was found and firing was going on across the pond. And over on the right-hand side, the pink, the yellow, the red, all of this area, if you look down in the legend in the left, bottom left corner, it explains what those colors mean, and basically a whole lot of cleanup and a whole lot of munitions found in those areas. The area not yet characterized, the pink area, that's a lot of area. So they're doing, still there's a lot to be done out there. The red, response not yet started. We know there are contaminants and munitions in those areas. You know, it's not been the quickest process because of the amount of munitions that have been found out there.
And you don't want to do it too quickly. You want to be careful.
Yeah.
And again, if we're looking for where is Hanson in this picture?
Not even on the map, just probably starting right below the pink over there. Okay, in the pond and going to the south. So, you know, the area in the pink, which is not yet characterized, but they have done the geophysics in the pond to show where the metallic stuff drops off as you head towards Hanson, and we're not seeing anything in the pond in the Hanson area. It's primarily this little triangle on this this side, on the west side of the pond, was that other location where they were shooting from. And so you've got that triangular, you know, because they're kind of shooting out from that one spot. And so that's where there was a potential for munitions, and we went in, and that's been addressed.
But yeah, that's a good point. So should we pull up the Hanson slide so they can see the properties along that area? Or you wanted to get to the phase 3?
Do we have a slide showing the section of, it basically it's...
Well, yeah, I sent that over to Meredith
Okay.
today, and they put it on
Okay.
the website. But I think the one you wanted to get to was the one that showed the
Yes.
alternatives.
Yep.
Okay, next slide. I'm not sure where in this slide presentation this is. Next slide. I'm sorry, I'm going to skip through some of these. I don't want to keep you all here all night. I know you want to see the Hanson properties that are affected by this. So, next slide. Okay, do not trespass. That's important for everyone.
Yes.
Did you say yes? Yes. Okay, do not trespass. Like I was saying, the site is restricted, the site access is restricted. Mention about the Hanover Police, they have that on the slide. Also, there is a police officer assigned to the site when cleanup is ongoing. They are there. They have cameras out there, trail cameras that you probably wouldn't even see, but those cameras see you. And the Hanover Police have, like I said, talked to and arrested a number of individuals. So for the safety of yourself, your family members, your pets, I know prior to this cleanup, a lot of people like to walk dogs out on those paths. It's a beautiful conservation area, and it will be returned to be a beautiful conservation area. But we don't want you or any family members to get hurt. So please, when you see those keep out, no trespassing signs, please heed those warnings. And next slide. Souvenirs, Gerard talked about that. If you do have those, I know those look like wonderful things to have. I've seen them too. They're cool looking. If you want to see them, go to the Hanover, or there's an old fire department that they have a museum there set up. You can see inert ones that are safe. Okay, yep, next slide. Phase 3, already talked about that. Next slide. This is basically the phase 3 that we're talking about, the remedial action plan. Next slide. Not sure where we put this. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's a good
Go
one.
back to that one.
That's a good
Oh,
one.
That's the one.
sorry, I'm going past the important ones. Elimination of substantial hazards, okay. So basically, alternatives. When you go through this phase 3, you're supposed to look at all the feasible alternatives. And one of them is a temporary solution. We don't think, they evaluated that, but that's not what Tetra Tech recommended. No one really wants a temporary solution with dealing this. We want to have the site closed out permanently. And so basically they were looking at alternatives 2 and 3, which are, it includes a whole lot of dredging of the river, dredging of the ponds to get that mercury contaminated sediment out. And basically when you get the mercury contaminated sediment out of the ponds, you're going to get the lead out, you're going to get the other contaminants that are mixed in that sediment. And mercury is really an important one here. That's what's contaminating the fish. It's definitely one of the main, other than the munitions, it's definitely a main contaminant out there. So alternatives 2 and 3 look at that. And 3, clean up 2. Really the difference is the second one removes everything that, in the opinion of the licensed site professional, removes the dangers and the hazards out there, but not to a background, not what would be there in the environment in the absence of the disposal site. That's basically what background is. The alternative 3 got into remove everything to background, like the site had never been there, contaminants had never been there. And of course that adds cost onto the remedial alternative. You're going to say this, there is definitely a difference in cost. Do you want to say anything about that slide? Okay, next slide. Okay, main components of 2 and 3, plans, permits. You know, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into these cleanups, excavating sediment and soil. I talked a little bit about that. Removal of metallic items, Gerard talked about the metallic items, possibly could be explosive, but either way, those metallic items have to be removed. We don't know if they're explosive or not until we actually get in there and attempt to remove them. Drying, solidifying excavated sediment, transporting it off-site. There will be a lot of transporting of these contaminated soils and sediments off-site. We're trying, Tetra Tech has come up with a number of plans, roads within the wooded areas of the sites that hopefully won't bring a whole lot of traffic to the area. I know a lot of folks, I think along one of the streets, there's a gravel operating plant out there that has a lot of traffic anyway.
It's to the east of the site, yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually the access road that we use and Tetra Tech uses to get to the site to do the munitions work.
That's outside the area of where any of the work was done before, the fireworks facility, and that soil is basically just soil. We're not seeing the metals over in that area. And I believe the town of Hanover is looking into the dust issue.
If we could just wait for them to finish up, and then we'll take the questions in an orderly fashion.
Okay, sure. So monitoring emissions of contaminants in the air and water, that's part of what the gentleman just brought up as far as emissions, contaminants. Confirmatory settlement and soil sampling to demonstrate compliance. Backfilling, we would like to, the area needs to be restored also once the contamination is removed. So that's restoring the disturbed areas. Monitoring recovery of restoration plantings. So we would like to get this back to an area that looks nice and looks like a nature and environmentally nice area once the contamination is actually removed. Next slide. So that is the industrial park area up in the northern portion of the site, and those areas that you see, I believe there are a number of these slides that where sediment removal will take place. There's a lot of contaminated sediment along the river system, and that is all proposed to be removed as part of this phase 3. So that's one portion of it. You can see the soil, and the sediment removal is basically through the river system. Somewhere in this report too, it talks about in 2010, there were 2 very large precipitation events, 2 100-year storms that occurred. And so a lot of this work that had been completed back in 2007, 2008 had to be redone because the concern was that because of the large amounts of precipitation, that a lot of this sediment, contaminated sediment, got moved up from the area it was located and moved downstream, moved into the ponds, moved further down, maybe spread out laterally where the rivers are a little bit slower. You can see where there are large curves. You have some soil, the orangish color is because a lot of when the area is flooded, of course, now you have water, now you have the contaminated sediment moving. So some additional work had to be done and a re-baselining, so to speak, kind of like a second phase 2 comprehensive site assessment had to take place because of those storm events. So that shows some of the area in the northern. You can go to the next slide. And I think that we have a number of slides that basically show from the northern area throughout the pond system, the purple sediment removal. I mean, it's basically the entire ponds. All of that is projected to have dredging occur. A high density metal area, that area that Gerard talked about, that yellow hashed area, that's quite a large area as well. And now see in this slide, now, when we put up the slide, yep, and that's a good one too. When we put up the slide that shows the areas that affect Hanson, down in this southern area, basically Factory Pond Dam, the line for Hanson you'll see will go kind of laterally across the bottom of that slide and then goes off to the right-hand side. But we do have a slide, and it's also up on your website too, that we'll show you. So conceptual site layout for the cleanup. It's quite a few areas. So next slide. Okay, and then Tetra Tech got into all the evaluation criteria. All of these things had to be looked at. All of these things had to be compared between the different alternatives to come up with what Tetra Tech recommends as the approach that they would like to move forward with. And that's just all the criteria. So you can go to the next slide. And then we have some very bright slides here, alternative ranking, but basically what you see in red was not, that didn't meet all of the criteria, that didn't meet all of the objectives for the cleanup. So just by looking at that with the red, alternative number 1, that was a temporary solution, meaning some contaminants are still there, maybe we have areas that are still off limits, areas restricted. We don't want that. You don't want that. Hanover doesn't want that. So alternative number 1, I think Tetra Tech said basically they're not considering that. They were looking at alternatives 2 and 3, which removes sediment out there, the contaminated sediment. And this, I know there's a lot of colors there, so if you want to move to the next slide. Again, so 1, remedial objectives, that's what RO is. Alternative 1, no, that's all the red. And 2 and 3, yes. So they evaluated 3 different ways of moving forward, remedial objectives here on this slide, and one basically was no. So next slide. And I know all of this is a lot of information to take in. We're going to move over to the Hanson slide shortly. So the estimated costs. Those are the costs. $92 million is the estimated number. You see there is a cost range. That's for alternative number 2, and then $97 million for alternative number 3. And of course, they broke that down. There are all kinds of percentages and statistics there, what it's going to cost to dredge. But if you look at B, which is dredging and dredge material disposal, that is the biggest chunk. That is 40% in both of those alternatives. So that is basically the meat and potatoes of this, is removing the sediment. That's where the contamination lies. That's what's going to happen during this cleanup. So it's a good thing that that's the largest percent in there. And then a number of the other things. You see unexploded ordnance support down in the bottom, 12%. And then the time frame, that's important too, down in the bottom. We're looking at, once this is chosen, once we get comments, and DEP, Mass DEP, we will add our comments as well. And we're most likely going to send a comment letter with our comments and comments that we receive from any residents in Hanover, and certainly from residents in Hanson too. So we're definitely looking for your input. We're going to put this letter together. We're looking at these things as well. And then the time frame, once an alternative is chosen, they have to design it. They're estimating that's going to take a year. And then you see the permitting, procurement, remedial action, 2 to 3 years. So we're looking at still 3 to 4 years, I think. Did you have a different number for that, Gerard?
I do. And I tend to be the person who tries to manage expectations a little bit. I think this could be optimistic. This is a very involved project. They're not even sure how they're going to do the dredging yet. One approach might be to, particularly where you have the 2 streams up in the northern part, you know, they kind of split. You could probably close off one stream, let all the water go through the other, and do your dredging fairly easily, and then go to the next stream. But when it gets down to Lily and Factory Pond and beyond, it gets a little more difficult. Are they looking to drain? Are they doing cofferdams? And then sometimes the permitting for that can take over a year. So I think a lot of times consultants will put down maybe timeframes that they think people might like to hear, but it's likely to take longer than that.
Did you throw a number out there?
What's that?
Did you put a number out there? No, you just said longer. Longer?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Checking on that.
No.
Okay, so we're looking at a few years, basically.
Basically, by then, the cost will be another 20%. So
That is something that we have to consider in part of our negotiation with them to ensure that we have sufficient funds to make sure, to see that this gets done. Yeah. And it's their nickel. This is not our nickel.
it should be all their nickel, and it should be done immediately.
Yes.
It's a hazardous site, and it shouldn't take 3 years to get permitting and start the project. It should be,
It involves a lot of folks. It involves a Corps of Engineers. It's a lot of people involved in the permitting. I hear
10
you.
years.
Yep.
10 years to get to where it is now.
Yep.
It's going to take another 10 years to get cleaned up.
What I've been hearing from, firefighters who have been on the site during the explosions and all that type of stuff, based on just hearing that you're moving through, they're saying that they expect to be there 10 years.
They expect what? I'm
They
sorry.
expect to be there 10 years based on the amount of area that you're covering, just looking for munitions.
We're not seeing that long for the munitions. No. So I think
Are we wrapping up? with the
We're getting
presentation,
close.
or- Okay.
Yep, I know. I think we just lost someone. So this is the time frame. If you can go to the next slide. Public comment. Okay, so this is important. Public comment, we want your input. So we've shown you how to navigate to the Hanson Town website, and then clicking on the links to get over to the Hanover Town website. This slide is within the presentation for Tetra Tech. You've seen the contacts for Mass DEP in our presentations from the September 24th meeting. And also links right here to the draft phase 3, although like I told you, there is that executive summary that can be accessed. Email to, and there is the email address for that, fireworkswrapcomments@tetratech.com. That's probably the easiest way to submit comments. If you're not a computer person, that's okay. We have an address, a snail mail type of address too, to be sent to Tetra Tech at their Boston location. So you can do that as well. And you have access to this online. And I think that might be the last slide.
yes. And actually,
Yes, we want to bring up the slide with the... Yep, so that's the last slide for this presentation. If we can get out of this presentation, I'd like to take everyone to show them the slide that actually has, we had the line drawn in for the Hanson, Hanover, and I think Pembroke town line.
That one
Let's
was the
see.
Hanson site.
Yep, if you go back to the Hanson site,
Here we go.
and down the bottom, to see if your property is located, yep, right there. And so Tetra Tech was kind enough to throw this on there. And although it's dark, the Hanson town line, I can't really point to it, maybe Gerard, you can point to it.
Yep.
Vanna, could you point to that for me?
So Hanson Town line runs like this, and then runs through the pond, and then follows the river down to the North River, around there. So from here down is Hanson. Most of the UXO work is being done up in that area there. So we're not really seeing UXO work anywhere near Hanson. And as I explained before, the geophysics indicates that the part of Factory Pond that's in Hanson doesn't have any metallic objects in it either.
Right, and if you see the Ludham's Ford Dam that's off to the right-hand side, I believe that's in Pembroke, but the testing that we were talking about, the additional sediment sampling in the river, will happen from the Factory Pond Dam, which is part of the site, through that river system up to the Ludham's Ford Dam. That's what we're looking to do in the spring of 2020. And are we going to get into questions?
Well, I do have a slide that I'm not going to show, because it's just one slide, and it'll take longer to put it up than it will take for me to talk about it. It's basically the next steps. So the focus now, obviously, is on the unexploded ordnance and addressing that. And I've heard things closer to a year rather than 10 years to wrap that up. And then, as Debbie mentioned, right now we're working on the contracting and a work plan for us to do the sampling between Factory Pond Dam and Ludden's Ford Dam, so that we get a little bit more information to see if that area has to be included in the cleanup by Tetra Tech. Right now we're thinking it is. It needs to be, and we just need a little more information to help us support that. Working on finalizing the Phase 3 with all the comments we received and putting together responses. Ultimately, the Phase 3 requires our approval, and I don't think, even with working with them, sometimes you talk to the licensed site professional and Tetra Tech about what we expect to see, and we still get a report that might not have everything in there. So I'm anticipating that we will do a conditional approval letter that outlines things that they need to do on top of what they proposed. And then once that gets approved, they can start working on the remedy implementation plan and the overall site cleanup. Now, there's one more interesting thing about this site that's going on that I want to bring to your attention. And when we settled with Tronox to get the money for the cleanup, their share of the cleanup, we also got some money out of them for natural resource damages. And natural resource damages is part of the waste site cleanup program, where when we have someone who's injured the environment, not only do we get them to clean up the site so there's no risk moving forward, no significant risk, we try to settle on monies to account for the damage that they've done, from the time that they polluted to the time the site gets cleaned up. And I believe the amount we've gotten so far out here is $7 million? 6 or 7?
Yeah, I think
$6 or
it's that
$7 million, and it's not for, that money is not to be used for the cleanup at the site. It's to be used to make we try to focus on the drainage basin where the injury occurred, to make the environment of the drainage basin a little better than it is now. And there will be an informational meeting in Hanover. If you're interested in listening to that, I suggest you keep your ears to the ground about that. Nothing with natural resource damages have been done out here yet. I'm working on a couple of other sites where we're doing some natural resource damage projects, so I can maybe explain a little what's involved. So there was a hazardous waste site in Walpole that impacted the Neponset River. So we're looking at what can we do in the Neponset River watershed to make the watershed a little better. So we identified this brook, Trap Hole Brook, in the Neponset River watershed, which is actually, even today, is a trout fishery. There's trout living in Trap Hole Brook. And if there's any fishermen out there, you know, that's pretty good water. Trout only like pretty good water, and they like cold water. And what we're doing is we're using some of that natural resource damage money to make the culverts that the Trap Hole Brook flow through wider, because what's happening now is they're too narrow, the water ponds up behind them, gets too warm, and it's not good for the trout. So we're taking that money and just doing stuff, and it's a whole public process. The public can, make suggestions, weigh in. A lot of times, I know the North-South River Watershed Association, we're at a Hanover meeting, I'm not sure if anyone's here tonight. For them, they'll be looking to, help with some of their projects to increase the overall health of the watershed that this is in. So right now, we're kind of scrambling a little bit. Natural resource damage coordinator just retired, but we're still holding to having the informational meeting in November. I don't think we set the date yet, but November 14th, this just in. So that'll be in Hanover. So you might want to keep your eyes open for that on the website of where that is.
That money separate from the 68.
Yes. Yes. So I think now's probably a good time to do the questions, and as the moderator asked at the beginning, because I'm kind of getting old, if you could come and use the microphone, we would appreciate that. And as we did in Hanover, a lot of people are shy about coming up and speaking at the microphone. We'll hang out afterwards if you want to talk to us individually as well. Okay?
Mr. Clemens, you want to come up?
Hi, I'm Phil Clements. I chair the Conservation Commission in Hanson, lifelong resident, and as a younger person, I used to personally fish in Factory Pond in Indian Head River, and pretty familiar with many details, but not all the molecules and atoms you can't see with your bare eye. As in conservation, we have some interests that we're required to have, that we said we would follow when we joined the commission. But overall, I would say, as someone who spent about 35 years doing environmental health and safety management in the corporate world, kind of globally, it's too bad when these things follow you home. This is the kind of project where you have a lot of overlap, significant overlap between environmental issues, wildlife issues, human health and human safety issues. They all overlap, and so we appreciate the comprehensive information you're given here. One of the things that interests me, and I think other fishermen, is that the fish sampling that has been done, very interested in the species sample, the numbers, the location, the ages of them. Not all fish stay in the same place all the time.
Right.
American eels go to the Sargasso Sea, and there's a lot of things to be considered there, as well as the important human health and safety issues. And I'll just close by saying that a very high interest will be and will continue to be any activity about sampling or removing sediment from the pond or from the stream. Lots of things go on in sediment. We don't pay attention to it because we don't usually see it. But by golly, this calls for attention, and the interest of the Conservation Commission, I think, is required. And we've already had a presentation by Tetra Tech of a little bit of the information, but there's only been a very little, a tantalizingly small amount of information about sediment in Factory Pond and down by Ludham's Ford. So we would love to be in touch with this. We'd like to be a resource to the team, but we're certainly consumers of the information as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. And a lot of those details that you're looking for are actually going to come out in that remedial implementation plan. Right now, they're looking at big picture, what do we need to do? We need to get the sediment out of there. But some of the things you need to think about too when you're getting the sediment out of there is that's where a lot of the critters start their life. So you can't just get the sediment out of there and walk away. There's some restoration that's going to need to go on there as well to try to get back to the good fishery that this was. But that will be there. I think given this, the Massachusetts contingency plan requires that when we issue a letter or when Tetra Tech is doing certain work, that they inform the Chief Municipal Officer and the Board of Health. But we could certainly add both conservation commissions to our copy list as well, so that you guys see what's going on firsthand.
I think that would be great, and I think we'd also like to attend that natural resource damage meeting on the 14th.
Okay, so as we get more information about it, we'll try to keep you up to speed on what's going on, but I'm not sure, do you know where it is, Deb?
I don't yet. It's in the planning stages right now.
So please.
Hi, my name is Peggy Westfield. I live on State Street. When you talk about the Department of Public Health, in 1988, I buried my 7-year-old son from leukemia. Does the Department of Public Health have all that information too?
What year?
I give them the information. I know that Nick Squires in Hanover has done a big thing on brain cancer. Yes. But if you look at the people around this room and people that I spoke to coming in, there are other kinds of cancer that I believe have been caused from this site. It may only be a small section of Hanson, but I'm on the Indian Head River, and I truly believe that that's where the contamination came from.
Yeah, I think you should contact the Department of Public Health with that information. There is a cancer registry in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so that when somebody is diagnosed with cancer, the doctors are required to put this into the registry, and this is what the Department of Public Health uses when they do one of their evaluations to see if there might be some environmental link to issues. It gets a little tricky because different cancers have different,
we were told,
latency and different sources and things like that. And I'm a hydrogeologist and shouldn't even be saying what I've said. But the DPH, they do have 2 people that have been assigned to this project that would be very willing to talk to you. Whether or not the registry goes as far back as you mentioned, I'm not sure, but they'll know. So if you go to the website with the DPH presentation, the contact information is the last slide in their presentation.
Now, when my husband and I researched this after we buried Matthew, we were told that nobody was doing anything at that site because once they dug it up, it would send all the contaminants into the air, into the river again, and everything else. Is that happening as everything is dug up? So we're all at risk again?
No, and that's part of the, whenever they submit a plan to us, even when they were doing the blowing up the unexploded ordnance that they found, there was air monitoring that was done to ensure that blowing up this material wasn't putting things in the air that could migrate off the site. They did the air monitoring immediately adjacent, not too close, but fairly close to where they were blowing the ordnance up, as well as on the property line, to confirm that this wasn't happening. I think, now we're so much better off than we were, 30, 40 years ago when it comes to environmental, doing environmental work. As the gentleman on the Concom could say, the controls we do now to ensure that we're not getting runoff when excavations are occurring, they had no controls in the past. It just happened. And now they're pretty stringent, and to ensure that that's not happening. And, we are overseeing this. We're out at the site a lot when they're doing the work to make sure that we're not going to get those impacts, because you don't want to make one area worse while you're trying to make another area better.
So the information we were given after Matthew passed about not disturbing the site was incorrect.
The information
We
about?
were told that they would not disturb the site.
What year was that?
We buried our son in '88.
88. First of all, I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
And in 1988, there was...
Our regulations were just born.
Yeah.
So we didn't really have the environmental regulations back then. So now, as this field evolves, we're learning, and we're much better off now in ensuring that we're not transferring material from one media to the other when we're doing these cleanups. They are going to have to remove material out of here, but it can be done in such a way that it eliminates any impact to other areas. Dredging, they're doing a tremendous amount of dredging in New Bedford Harbor. They put up dredge curtains so that when they're excavating, the sediment doesn't wash further downstream and deposit someplace else. And that may be an approach that they take out here. But whatever approach they take, we want to ensure that they're not going to make things worse in other areas. And when the dredging is done, there's going to be a requirement for post-dredging sampling to ensure that all the areas, that other areas weren't impacted, as well as we reach the cleanup goals in the area that were addressed.
Thank you.
And there's a whole lot of technology that's occurred since that time. So we're going to make sure that the contamination is not transferred from just one media to another. We're taking all those precautions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Anybody else have a question? No, please, come to the microphone.
My name's Linda Coughlin. I live right on Factory Pond, and I've lived there since 1997. I have a swimming pool in my backyard that's extremely close to the pond, and it has a two-way valve on it. So if anything shifts and water would leave the pool, the pond fills it. I have endured these explosions.
The pond fills it?
The pond fills it?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So I've endured these explosions for the past 2 years. My house shakes. Things fall off my mantle. I now have a crack in my foundation, through and through, top to bottom. I have cracks in walls. I ended up with some sediment in my pool. I have cracks in my pool. And I've made several phone calls. I talked to Mary. Mary was the only one that actually did try and help me. Hanover wasn't very friendly. And I talked to Tetra Tech, and everybody tells me it's not their responsibility. And your house insurance does not cover your foundation, which I did find out. It's just, they cover your house. They don't cover your foundation. It's not part of it. And
So you did have the insurance company come out and look at it?
I had the building inspector come look at it to make sure it was structurally sound to still live in.
Yeah.
I called my house insurance, and I haven't had them come out yet because they know what it's caused from, and they had said they don't cover foundations. They would cover the pool, but if it's caused from the explosions, they would rather the same company cover everything. And I'm just at a loss of who to talk to get these things taken care of.
And I might add that I have heard from several other residents that they have had cracks in their foundations as well, right in that area near where the,
Okay.
Where the detonations are occurring.
It's like directly across the pond from us, and I mean, my house literally shakes. My dog hears the siren, and he gets up and walks and sits in somebody's lap. And he's done this now for 2 years.
And I mean, I have to believe that the LSP has some type of insurance for the work that they're doing there, and certainly with the funds that Kerr McGee has put into that escrow, it seems to me as though it would be at a minimal if somebody were able to prove that the damage was done to their house as a result of this work being done, that they could be reimbursed for that damage. I don't think that that's a really tall order. You know, certainly Mrs. Coughlin and the other people impacted didn't choose to have detonations happening in their backyard that was going to cause damage. Who would be the best person for people to talk to about that?
Well, I was under the impression before this discussion that your insurance company would investigate what the potential sources were and whatnot and cover it. So I'm a little bit at a loss, and we'll probably have to have some discussions with folks back at the office to see if we can help you out with that.
Thank you.
Okay.
So could you reach back out to Mary once you...
Linda?
I have pictures if you would
Could you, yeah.
Okay. Actually, I think the location, I think Deb's looking for you to mark the location of where you live.
Anyone else with a question or a comment? Oh, please, if you do, come right down to the microphone, and then as soon as they finish up, and then we'll move on.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Carroll. I live on Christopher Lane. So, you know, we had the detonation. We've known what's been going on, but not necessarily to the fullest extent. My boys, so the streams that run off of Factory Pond, I don't know, in Indian Head River, I'm not sure. But my boys from the dam, they've been fishing for months down there, catching, releasing, you know, touching the handle on the fish. And it wasn't until a neighbor went to the Hanover meeting that we got additional information. Like, we knew the pond was, you know, don't eat the fish and all that, but we didn't really know the extent of it. So my question is, at this point, I mean, since that meeting, I said, no more, I don't want you down there. And this gentleman had brought up the fishing, so my question is, like, what is the actual concern for them to be fishing in that area? Should they not be down there at all?
So just catch and release and not eating the fish.
Yeah, I mean, they don't yet, but they're still handling it, so I don't know if, like, you know,
I think the mercury accumulates in the fat tissue in the fish,
Yeah.
so it wouldn't necessarily be an issue on the
exterior,
scales.
yeah.
New Bedford, which has the PCBs in the harbor, it's catch and release is allowed. It's don't eat the fish. It's because it's not something that builds up in the scales that would have any direct contact issue.
Okay, so it's safe for them to be down there. I mean, they're not near Factory Pond, but the stream that runs off
Into it?
Factory Pond.
Okay.
So where, can you point to it also on here? Where there?
Talking about Indian Head River.
Indian Head River?
The Indian Head River itself? Okay.
I mean, so basically his factory pond, so it's down
So
in this,
where's the dam?
right here.
The factory pond dam near the ski place?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what flows underneath?
Yep.
And then continues.
Charles Mann Bridge. On the left side, the upstream side, there is a large orange sign, don't go there. On the right side, the eastern side of Winter Street, there are no signs. The Indian Head River, actually it's Drinkwater River at that point,
Yes.
flows left to right, west to east. The fish don't know where they are, whether there's a sign in front of them or not. I don't know if they did it this year, but I personally have seen in past years the State Department of Fish and Game park a truck on the bridge and unload through a pipe numerous quantities of trout in the spring. And what we're interested in doing, one reason I was asking that before, is we aren't sure, we don't know whether a very short dwell time, if you will, of such imported trout from very clean sources would result in a trout that doesn't caught in there. Let's say you caught it half a mile downstream with no orange signs around. I think it's a valid question to say, what is there to be said about that type of fish? It's because rivers and fish move, and this sort of activity is very common. I was talking to a fisherman on State Street about a mile downstream from that this past spring about other things. But I think it's one of the more important questions to share with, to get answered for the public, whether they're casual fishermen or people who have been doing it for years. It's just, I think, the public that engages directly in water contact and fish contact, whether they release it or not, it's high interest.
On the water contact there, the water has been sampled, and we're not seeing the contaminants in the water. It's a sediment issue. So, but the fish thing is of concern.
Sediment contains things including microorganisms and large invertebrates. That's what many fish live on. We all know the food chain. And things concentrate as they move up. That's why mercury especially is infamous for that sort of thing.
Yes.
And so again, the question is of high interest.
Yes.
Is there any danger to coming into direct contact with the sediment at that point? Say somebody fell in and stood up and got out of the brook.
I think in that case, and I'd have to see if they had covered any of this in their risk assessment in the phase 2, which is where that should be covered. But a lot of times our risk numbers are based on repeated exposure. I think the one-time exposure is so incidental that it wouldn't pose a risk. It's a risk to the fish because, as he pointed out, the little bugs start there, and then bigger bugs eat it, and bigger bugs, little fish, and all the way up. And every time something else eats it, it bioaccumulates. So then when it gets to the big fish, they've had a lot of things that have had mercury in their system, and that's where that risk is coming from. The incidental contact with the sediment, I don't see, but we'll confirm that that's in the risk assessment.
Yes, sir.
My name's Paul Nickel, and I live right at the dam, Factory Pond, right on the Indian Head River. So the drink water river, sir. We see fishermen like on a regular basis that come and fish along the river, and I'm constantly throwing people out of there, explaining to them it's not safe for them to be, fishing with the fish there.
Are they taking the fish?
I have no idea. I mean, I think we constantly seeing them there.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there are people that are taking fish home. So I think that's something that needs to be monitored better. More signage, whatever you need to do, but there's something more.
No, I appreciate hearing that. I didn't realize this tonight.
Yeah.
So appreciate hearing this.
The other thing is, as the lady had mentioned, with the explosions, I've had, personally, we've had thousands of dollars worth of damage caused by my dog just from you get the siren that goes off.
Right.
It's like Pavlov's treatment to the dog. Okay? The dog hears the siren, and now he knows the explosion's coming, so he starts running around the house. He's throwing himself through a glass door, trying to actually eat his way out of the house through a door. And it's just, to the point where I've had to take the dog and now put him in daycare rather than have him out around. It's, and the amount of explosions, your house is shaking. Like on your slideshow, you were showing explosions every few weeks, but previous to this, it was every day, Monday through Friday.
It was,
Right.
and we cut back on that because
And
of
the reason that they're
issues.
saying that it's slowed down is now that you're closer to houses, they've had to take extra care in the digging in order to get the munitions, is what I'm being told. And that's the reasons that it's slowed down, but it will pick up as they move to another area.
My understanding is the reason we're not doing it 5 days a week is because of the disturbance to the residents in the area.
That's not what I was told.
Okay.
Okay. What I was told was that it's because...
No, we're still finding quite a bit.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying, is that you're so close to houses now that they can't take the active digging approach that they were taking before.
We're actually probably digging in a couple of different places at that time, and we're uncovering probably as much as we have been. It's primarily because to give you guys a break that it's not every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That's
Is it on a constant schedule so people can plan?
We try to do it about the same time in the afternoon. Typically, I think it's between 2 and 4. Try to shoot it as close to 3 as possible. There is a siren that warns people about the shot. To me, I think the siren is more of an annoyance. It's pretty loud. But we've been pretty much doing the detonations at the same location, in the same area. It's the type of thing where we can't take the stuff off-site to do it. It's just too dangerous to do that, to take this material across the roads. So it has to be done on the property.
Yeah, generally, the timeframes Gerard mentioned, usually between 2 and 4 p.m. And it's been cut back. Looks like the schedule for Thursday, September and October, there was one day in September, it was on a Thursday, first week, also first week in October. So definitely trying to cut back on that.
And it's posted on the websites when it's anticipated the explosions will be?
I think they do have a list on the
Yes.
Hanover one, yes.
Yes, so on the Hanover website that we looked at, the picture with the pond and the trees, right below that, it's one of the first, it said code red notifications and then controlled detonation notices.
Yes, sir.
Mike Sayer on Winter Street near the ski shop. I don't know if I heard you correctly earlier. When you said the pond was going to be dredged, is that the whole pond or just the Hanover side, the Hanson side?
No, they've identified areas within Factory Pond that have high levels of mercury in the sediment, and those are the target areas. There's no town line involved here.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
When I was looking at your pictures up there, you said you had 63 million, but it's going to take 130 million to clean it?
Yep.
What happens when it costs even more than that amount of money?
Well, that's where in negotiating now with the potentially responsible parties to ensure that that money is available to do the cleanup. That's what the Attorney General is doing for us.
Will that be passed on to the town as a cost if you can't get that raised?
Our cost is to get it from the potentially responsible party, and we feel confident that we can do that.
I'd like to actually just kind of add to that. So, of course, we want to get it as cleaned up as possible at no cost to our taxpayers or to the state, really, because none of us were responsible for this. And we know that we've got some deep pockets out there in the way of potentially responsible parties, so it seems to me as though if they benefited from it, they also ought to pay for the damages that they caused. But to this gentleman's point, and I think I told you guys before, and I say this all the time, I dwell in worst case scenario. So if we go for the full cleanup to background, and the estimate that you've got turns out to maybe not be accurate, right? Because we don't know what we don't know. I know you've done quite a bit of work, but you've already found things that were unexpected through the process, and so it's possible you might find even more surprises. Can you give us some assurance that you're working with Maura Healy to aggressively negotiate amounts from these people? And I know you can't speak to amounts, and I know you can't speak to results, but can you give us some assurance that the amounts that you will end up getting will adequately cover some contingencies as well as that full background cleanup? Is that a possibility?
Yes, I mean, again, typically, on most of the sites that we work on, that Deb and I work on a daily basis, it doesn't have Attorney General involvement. We'll use our own legal staff. But in this case, where it is, such a complex site, that we brought them in, and I think that helps to guarantee that we're going to get the money necessary to do the cleanup. And I'm not sure what that order is going to look like as we move forward. It may not be setting up an escrow account. It may just have a goal that they need to get to, and that goal will be a permanent solution. And if surprises are found along the way, they're going to have to deal with those surprises. It's really hard to say now, but the goal that we have, that the Attorney General and Mass DEP has with these PRPs, is to get this site to a permanent solution at no cost to the taxpayers to us, which is the
I
taxpayers.
mean, of course, you could see how this would really
Yep,
stick in
absolutely.
people's cars if we not only have to live with the pollutants and all the nuisance that you've just heard
Mm-hmm.
tonight, plus the potential health issues, and then to turn around and flip it, and if there were ever a chance that they'd come and try to say, well, you know, the towns have got to pay, that just wouldn't float. Yeah.
And we heard some of those same concerns at the meeting with the town of Hanover on September 24th as well. In the town of Hanover, they're doing some in-kind services, which I know we all appreciate, like, for instance, fuel of the generators that are on site. So they're trying to contribute so that that money that's in this trust fund can go as far as possible. But also, like Gerard said, we are, Attorney General's office is negotiating with other parties as well. And they are moving, they have informed us expeditiously as possible towards some type of agreement to secure additional funds for the cleanup of this site.
I had another question about, we just put in 2 wells up on State Street that are less than a mile away from the factory pond. Have those been tested? Has the water flow been checked on that since they've been put in?
I'm sorry, the wells? What type
Are
of
you
wells?
talking about the water department,
The
sir?
water department just put 2 800-foot wells, 2 800-foot wells.
Oh, wow, so they're probably bedrock wells, and they're pumping from the bedrock aquifer, is my guess.
Well, it's
So,
less than a mile away from
yep, there is our Division of Water Supply has some pretty stringent requirements for putting in public water supply wells that include a lot of testing to make sure that they're going to be okay before they go online. And once they are online, there's annual testing of that water to ensure that it meets the standards, the water that's sent to the customers meet the standards.
Do they test for all the chemicals you're finding in there?
As part of the program for siting a new well, they do look at potential sources of contamination. The contamination, as we said, we feel very comfortable that it's right around factory pond. So the way hydrogeology works is groundwater flows underground. It's really not rivers. It's the entire underground has groundwater, and it flows from areas of high topography to areas of low topography, and that groundwater discharges in those low areas, and that's where our ponds and rivers come from. So the factory pond complex is a major groundwater discharge location. All the groundwater in the area is discharging to factory pond. Okay, it's flowing towards the pond, not away from the pond. Okay, so, but a lot of these contaminants that we're dealing with at Fireworks, mercury and lead in the soil, tend to be a soil contamination issue. They're not very soluble. They don't get in the groundwater. So they even if we were like pumping a lot of water out of these wells and possibly pulled it away, and I'm not saying that will happen, but keeping with your worst case scenario approach, the mercury and the lead is not soluble and wouldn't get in the groundwater. So that leaves one other contamination that might be, we've got the chlorinated solvents that are in the groundwater, which are somewhat soluble, and that is tested by the water supply. Volatile organics is tested by water supplies on a regular basis to ensure that there's no impact to the drinking water.
One last thing.
Okay.
Have you put any air quality testing around the Landis site? I mean, there's 300 trucks a day coming in and off of that container.
That nuisance ash issue would be more of a local thing, and from what I've heard is
Operating on a contaminated site like that?
so there's no indication that the Landis site is contaminated. So when a assessment is done of a hazardous waste site, we rely on a lot of information, and we try to look at historical information to figure out what was done where at a particular site and what types of contaminants might be related to those activities. And there happens to be a tremendous amount of historic information on the fireworks site, because the Army was really good at writing a lot of stuff down that they did. And we actually found a lot of information in the Hanover Historical Society about the fireworks site. And based on the information that we found, the Landis site was not part of any of the activities that occurred when it was the fireworks site. And then looking at the contaminant distribution and what we're seeing in the soil also confirms that. So we have no indication that the Landis site was part of the fireworks site and is therefore contaminated by the fireworks site.
But has it been tested? They were drilled?
There are wells off towards that area, yeah.
All right, that-
Any other questions?
Hello.
I live on Christopher Lane as well. My name's Samantha Erickson. I went to the heated Hanover discussion.
Ah.
I didn't think it was that bad.
This was much more civilized. Yes, it's more civilized.
Yeah.
I've been to worse.
But so I'm learning a lot about this, and I just have a question. So at the Hanover meeting, they said that they tested the Forge Pond, like that park.
Yes.
Well, and then they tested a residential.
Irrigation.
well.
Irrigation.
Those are irrigation wells.
Yeah, they
Yep.
tested a residential irrigation well.
We actually
along
did that. Yeah.
Somewhere in that area. But shouldn't the wells along the whole area, like periodically be tested? I'm just nervous. I have 2 little kids that are outside playing in the sprinklers, eating the dirt, like my dog's outside. I mean, I can't be like, you guys can't go outside. I live 100 yards from the pond.
These are the only wells that we have identified in close proximity to the fireworks site, and they're just used for irrigation. You know, we've worked with the Board of Health, we've looked to see if there's any indication that there are private water supply wells that are used for drinking water, and we found no records to that. We did have people say, I've got an irrigation well, and we tested those. We didn't think that they were going to be impacted, knowing the conceptual site model of the site and how contaminants move, and we confirmed that. As I mentioned earlier, public water supplies, which, you know.
Yeah, ours comes from the other side of Hanson. I call the.
Yes.
the store
What street again?
Christopher Lane, so right by Country Ski and Sport.
Okay.
So public water supplies, you know, have to calculate their zone of contribution for the groundwater, and none of the public water supplies wells zone of contribution go near the Hanover site. And they do their testing to ensure that folks are not being impacted. And as I mentioned to the other gentleman, volatile organic compounds, of which vinyl chloride and trichloroethylene are one of those 40-something compounds, are tested on a regular basis in public water supply wells.
But all along the site, on the south side as well? I know you keep saying that the south side's not, the pond isn't contaminated, but a slideshow that you put up before with the pink area, it basically said that it wasn't explored.
Explored for the unexploded ordnance. As far as, they haven't done the detailed geophysics to identify where some unexploded ordnance might be buried in that location. It has been explored relative to groundwater and soil contamination. We know that the soil is impacted with metals in that area. And when they're doing the unexploded ordnance removal, they're also removing the contaminated soil and sending that off-site for proper disposal. So what they'll do is they'll go in with very detailed geophysical instruments to identify buried metallic objects, you know, down to 6 feet or so. And then they kind of have to dig carefully around them as they get to them, because you don't know what they are till you see them. And that's what's meant by that hasn't been completely explored. We think that you can do a couple of different types of geophysics. One's a quick pass where you walk over with the instrument and it tells you that there's an issue, but then you got to go back with more detailed instrumentation before you start digging to make sure you're not digging into this stuff, so that you can carefully remove it. That's what we meant by that area not being completely studied to do the unexploded ordnance. As far as contaminant distribution and sediment, soil and groundwater, that's part of the phase 2, and we feel very comfortable with that was done completely. And the surface water tends not to be impacted, which, again, given the types of contaminants, we're not surprised about, that they tend to get bound up in the sediment that has a lot of organic material. They kind of stick to the organic material that's in the sediment, and that's why it's a sediment problem and not a surface water problem or a groundwater problem. The mercury got into the streams and factory pond not through contaminated groundwater migrating underground with mercury. That doesn't really happen. They got in because it was directly discharged to the surface water bodies while the fireworks facility was in operation.
So you're saying if I have a vegetable garden, I feed it with my well water, my family's gonna be fine?
So you have a well water?
I have a vegetable garden and
Yep.
a well. So that well.
You have an irrigation well?
Yeah,
Okay.
feeds the garden.
And we've not tested your irrigation well?
What's that?
We've not tested your irrigation
No,
well?
that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
If all the residential wells, or periodically,
Yep.
random ones should be tested.
See,
It just seems weird that the southern side is supposedly the dumping ground.
Yeah.
And nothing's been tested there, none of the residential wells. It's very unsettling.
We feel comfortable that we know where the contamination is. We have, irrigation wells don't require the permitting that other wells do. So there may be irrigation wells out there that we don't know about.
The groundwater doesn't, like I probably maybe don't understand it, but the groundwater doesn't feed that well.
No, the groundwater feeds it, but the groundwater is flowing towards Factory Pond. So say this
I
is...
mean, I live on the pond.
Huh?
I live like basically on the pond.
Yeah. And again, it's not in the surface water, it's in the sediment. It won't be drawn back from your well through the groundwater because it's bound up in the sediment. But to make you feel more comfortable,
Yeah.
we'd be willing to sample your
Well,
well.
I emailed
why don't-
someone actually and I never got a response.
What's that?
I emailed someone like 2 weeks ago. and
Oh, really?
never
2 weeks ago,
got a
I have to
response. I think I
say,
actually spoke to you on the phone.
we are.
And I'm
you
sure
spoke
you
to
bogged
Jenny, I
down,
think.
yeah.
Jenny Moore, I think.
What's that?
I think you probably spoke to Jenny. She works.
Maybe, yeah.
We-
And then I got forwarded, then she gave me an email address and whatnot.
We have been inundated.
I'm sure you have been, yeah.
So why don't you show me?
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Now,
I'm sorry.
my neighbor's bills just at least.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
You too?
I understand about the groundwater flowing towards Factory Pond.
Yes.
What happens if there's a lot of rain, like the 100-year storms that we talked about? Is it possible that the pond will flood and then push the water towards the irrigation wells?
So the pond rises up and you could have a reversal in groundwater flow, but it's just going to be right around the pond and for a very short time while the pond is at that level. But again, if that happened, it's the surface water is rising up, flows backwards, say, from the pond into the aquifer. It's what's in the surface water that would be flowing into the aquifer. And we've got lots of surface water samples that indicate that there's nothing in the surface water. The contamination in the pond is in the sediment, okay? And having worked in this field for a long time, you get to learn how different contaminants behave in the environment. Okay, metals aren't soluble. Okay, so, and they prefer to stick to something that's organic rich. And sediment basically is 50, 60, 80% organic material. So the mercury in the sediment in the pond is kind of stuck in the sediment. Even if the groundwater reversed itself and the surface water flowed into the groundwater, that mercury is going to stay in the sediment. But
That said, you're willing to test the
absolutely.
irrigation wells?
Absolutely. It's not much for us to provide ease of mind.
Does the depth of the well matter, like if it's 220 feet deep? If that's from pulling water close from the bottom?
The question was, what's the effect of the depth of the well? So,
Again, it doesn't really matter because we're not seeing the impact to the surface water. So if you had a well that was pulling surface water out of the pond, and that does happen in occasions, but it's usually, something of the size of a public water supply. An irrigation well in your backyard, you're not pumping enough water to cause that reversal and flow. You just don't. But even if you did, let's say you did, worst case scenario, she likes worst case scenarios, the water's not impacted. But that mercury is going to stay bound up in the sediment, and it's not going to get into the water.
Am I right in thinking, looking at the periodic table, the mercury and lead are so much heavier than hydrogen and oxygen that that's another reason that they do not get up into the surface water? You would be expecting something far too dense and atomically huge.
It's more the bonding to the organic material. It's been a long time since I've done chemistry on this level, but the valence and whatnot, they tend to bond onto the organic material.
and Mr. Blass, you're one of the few people I've ever heard reference the periodic table after high school. I know.
Oh, he's a science
That's
teacher.
why we're lucky to have Mr. Clements.
We've been outed.
If I could just add a word to this discussion, which is very useful. Of
course.
The mercury and lead, they tend to be immobilized
Yep.
by the way they bond to particles.
Yep.
As opposed to something like, say, a volatile organic compound, which just wants to escape and be free and go in the water and go in the air. And so
Volatiles like carbon too.
Yeah.
But they also like to be in the air.
But, but what I think is true, from I'm not as much experience as you, is these sorts of materials, they're immobilized by the sediment, the way they act. The water molecules, which move around much more freely, that's what does move. One other thing I think is important to say is, right, irrigation wells are not registered and recorded the way drinking water wells are, but to the extent that an irrigation well is used by any private property to irrigate their food supply, their garden, the interest grows, so to speak. And so your response sounds pretty good to the person on the street, I think.
Yeah, I mean, any information we get on a site, is good information. And grabbing a sample out of an irrigation well and having it analyzed for a number of contaminants, we'd be doing metals and volatiles.
Yes.
I think is what we did on the other ones, which is it'd be 13 different kinds of metals, 40-something different kind of volatile organic compounds. It's, because it's a sampling point that's already in place, it's a pretty low-cost way to get some additional information.
Any other questions? Well, seeing none, thank you very much.
I think we had one up
Oh, yes.
How come the town of Hanover does, or how come this isn't considered like a Superfund site?
And the question is...
You were at that meeting, right? You were at that Hanover meeting.
I just don't understand, the money just doesn't make sense, and like he said, like a 20% increase over the next 10 years, it's a big discrepancy in the money. Like, why wouldn't you I just don't understand what the downfall is to approaching a Superfund site.
It was actually, that was discussed a few years ago about whether or not we wanted to go Superfund or keep it under the state program. And I think the decision at the time was because the escrow account was set up and we did have some good potentially responsible parties to do the work and ensure that we get to a permanent solution, that it would work under the state program. The ultimate goal at the end of the day, whether it's under the state or the federal, the cleanup ends up being the same. I'm not so sure that, is there anyone in here from the EPA? That they're necessarily faster than we are to get this work done. And under EPA doing it as well, because there is a good potentially responsible party doing the work, they would continue to do the work under EPA oversight. Now the work is being done, but it's under DEP oversight. And the Massachusetts contingency plan looks a heck of a lot like the national contingency plan with what the outcomes are going to be and stuff like that. So the decision was made at the time to keep it in the state program because it seemed to fit fairly well there. A little more local flavor.
And again, if you could come to the microphone,
Sorry.
If you don't mind, just because the audience at home may have trouble hearing the questions.
And the audience up here.
Pregnant lady, come on.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. So if the project runs out of money, then what happens? Is it just like on hold for 10 years, or does the money just appear?
I mean, actually, at that point, if it does, and again, we're confident that it won't.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to start by saying that. That
We
isn't.
need money to fix it at the end,
Yeah.
the trees and whatnot, but we don't even have money to finish the project.
Right.
The Defense Department runs out of money. We've got bigger problems than factory bonds.
Right, they are one of the potentially responsible parties. And we're confident that we can get the money necessary to get this to a permanent solution. If, worst case scenario, the EPA is always a card we can play at that time. And having them come in and work on it.
Would that be the Superfund?
Yes.
Yeah. So then would it start over?
No, I mean, so much work has been done on that, it would probably be implementing some kind of.
Right, but it wouldn't be like a 5-year lapse, that it would just kind of.
I can't promise that it wouldn't be. So, and I think that was one of the reasons why we wanted to keep it in the state program. It was already in the state program moving forward. And I know it's taken a long time, and some gentlemen out there commented on that. You know, the UXO was a bit of a surprise. We knew it was out there, just not at the amount that we saw. The, you know, 100-plus year flood thing that we got in the middle of doing all this work. So we've hit a couple of snags. I think it's moving forward at a fairly good pace right now. And, you know, getting through the phase 3 process will help us wrap up our negotiations with the potentially responsible parties and be in a situation where everybody's more comfortable if this thing is going to get to a permanent solution.
All right.
Thank you.
It really
Did you
is.
want to come down, sir?
I was just going to say, this really is moving at a very good pace right now. I know all these years, and you're sitting there saying, wow, this has taken so long, but the progress on this site in the last few years has been so much more than has been done decades before this. So this site is really at a good place, and we are confident and comfortable and moving forward. We're looking for comments. Comment period ends next Friday on the phase 3. And then once we put that information out and do, like Gerard said, a conditional approval, Tetra Tech gets right down working on this, on the phase 3. Get this done, pick a remedial alternative, and then move into phase 4 and start with the designs, as well as concurrently removing munitions from the site. So there's a whole lot going on a daily basis on this site, and the site really is moving forward.
And may I just mention, I think to this woman's question earlier about the Superfund site, we weren't part of the discussion about whether this was going to be a Superfund site or not, but one of the things that it seems to me that we've been experiencing since we've become aware of this is you would lose a lot of that local control, like having you guys be able to come here, like being able to visit the Lakeville office, like being able to call up Representative Cutler and Senator Brady. We've got Keating and Markey here. You've got that kind of a local ability to try to influence the outcome, and I'm not sure that you'd have as much of that if you go to a Superfund scenario. That's just my personal opinion.
Good point.
And in some cases, there is a negative stigma associated with having a Superfund site in your town. You know, so if we can get to the same outcome without that negative stigma, we're all better off.
Who determines whether to go to the Superfund site?
Well,
Is that the state or is that the town of Hanover?
everybody. Everybody has to have, you know, kind of agreed moving forward. We work with, and because part of it's in Hanson, we would work with the Hanson folks and say, you know, we want to do this. The governor actually ultimately has to sign off on the request to go to EPA. It's a before we even do that, it's a fairly involved scoring process that we have to go through to see if it would even meet the criteria to go into the Superfund site. And I'm not 100% convinced that this one would. Yet we've got issues with the sediment and the UXO. I think they're being addressed fairly well. We don't have people drinking contaminated soil or contaminated water. We don't have people breathing contaminated air in their house. These are the types of things that kind of raise up to the level of the EPA wanting to get a little more involved. So I think, you know, we'd have to score it and see if it would score. I'm not sure. And then we'd have to get buy-in from both municipalities in this case, and the governor is not going to sign off on the request until we get buy-in from the municipalities.
And it's my understanding that it was brought quite a few years ago before a prior Board of Selectmen, and they neglected, they decided that they didn't think it was in the best interest of the citizens of Hanson. I think Hanover felt the same way, and that's how we've gotten where we are now. That's my understanding.
You're welcome.
So any other questions? Oh, please, come down to the microphone if you could.
Lisa Nugent, I live on Goen Drive, been there 23 years. I guess my question would be, why doesn't the government come in and clean up their site? I'm sure they have all the equipment to encase their own ignitions and detonations and get in and get out and get it done.
That's true. The Army Corps of Engineers does a lot of dredging, right?
They do.
They
And,
got a lot of our tax dollars.
and our goal is to get all the PRPs to take a more aggressive role in this. We are in somewhat of a good position because a lot of times we're trying to get these folks to the table to do the work that's necessary to do, and we don't have this nice escrow account that allows us to do the work while we're going through sometimes some pretty difficult negotiations. So the work is moving forward. Our goal is to get all the PRPs to the table to do, and particularly the causally responsible PRPs, the ones who dumped the stuff there and was responsible for the material ending up there, to participate in our order and get this site cleaned up. We are doing that, but in the meantime, the site is moving forward. Okay.
Did you have a question, sir? Okay, great. Any other questions? Well, seeing none, thank you very much for a very informative.
That was a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I certainly learned a lot. So as they said, they'll be here for a few minutes after the end of the formal presentation. And
We actually got kicked out of Hanover High School at some point. They said, everybody's just,
I'm guessing the
10 p.m.
custodial staff will
At
be
10
doing the
o'clock.
same to us at some point.
At 10 o'clock, it was a little worse.
We hope not to stay till 10.
But thank you all for coming out. I'll see you soon.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, well, here we are. It's October 16th. I'm at the Hanson Middle School, and we've just wrapped up the session with the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and we're very grateful that they came here. We had roughly 30 citizens show up, but the good part is that this meeting will be televised on cable so other people can follow up and follow the situation. The reason we had the meeting tonight is there is a public comment period that ends on October 25th, and I want to make sure that the citizens from Hanson have their voice heard. We are a small part of the cleanup site, but we are a part of the cleanup site nevertheless, and we've gotten short shrift up to this point. And I just think it's reprehensible that we haven't been at the table and been a more active part of these discussions. Can't do much about the past, but we can certainly try to influence the future, and that's what we're doing here. So the public comment period, as I mentioned, ends on October 25th. During the cable program, they will have put up the email address and the actual physical address that you can send comments to. It's also on the Hanson website. It's also on the Hanover Fireworks page on the Hanover Town website. We had a very civil discourse tonight, and lots of good questions having to do with irrigation wells, having to do with flow of water, having to do with all kinds of things. But the main thing is that I would really encourage everybody to reach out and send your comments in. What we're looking for is full cleanup at no cost to us. So we want full funding, full cleanup, and nothing else. We just shouldn't settle for anything less. We simply deserve that. I would also encourage you to reach out to Attorney General Healy's office. I was pleased tonight that we had representatives from Markey's office, Warren's office, and Keating's office. So I think that is very telling of the degree of attention that this is getting at a federal and a state level. I've also reached out individually to Cutler's office and Brady's office. They both had prior engagements for this evening, but are very much aware of what we're looking to get out of that site and the fact that we want it cleaned up, again, at no cost to taxpayers. The time is now. You can't procrastinate. We've got till October 25th to get those comments in and influence the outcome. So I really encourage you to do that. Again, check on the Hanson website, the Hanover website, and there's information about how to contact Tetra Tech, which is the licensed professional that's taking care of the cleanup there and collecting all of the comments. So thanks for listening, and if you attended, thanks for attending, and if not, then watch it on cable and catch all of the exciting updates. Thanks.